Good afternoon, good morning from South Africa, good afternoon to other guests around the world, and good evening where necessary. Welcome to another Good Governance Academy, and especially the Research Forum webinar, online webinar. We're very excited about our next webinar to present. I just want to see, while our participants are joining us, let's give them a minute or two as I see our numbers climbing and people joining. Please put your way of joining us from, all our attendees, in the chat if you want to, so we can welcome you while the others are joining. So let's give it a sec or two. Okay, wow, numbers are climbing, and we're really looking forward to all our attendees and our presenters today. Another minute or so. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Okay, I think it's safe for us to start our webinar today. So, good morning, afternoon, and evening from myself, Lindy Grebe, from the Good Governance Academy, and specifically the Research Forum. We are delighted to host a new webinar to our attendees from the Research Forum side, and it focuses on internal auditing, the impact on our standards, and especially, like our presenters have explained to me, the practical relevance to the internal audit field in a new era that we are entering. So I'm delighted to welcome once again Prof. Cesar Boschkes, who's also one of our steering committee members on the Research Forum side. She's an experienced researcher in all things assurance, digitalization, the fourth industrial revolution. So it's wonderful to have you back once again, Prof. Cesar. And please, anyone who wants to learn more about Prof. Cesar's background and all her research initiatives, because she has a lot going, please visit her on LinkedIn and learn more about that. Joining Prof. Cesar today, we have Dr. Lethiwe Nzama. She's a senior lecturer in auditing, so once again an assurance expert, specifically with a background in internal auditing at the University of Johannesburg. And she will be presenting as well. She has previously lectured also on financial accounting and worked as an accountant. She's a well-balanced academic as she contributes immensely to the accountancy sector, and like I've mentioned, the new era in internal auditing, practically speaking there. Then also we are privileged to be joined by Mr. Dirk Strydom with a master's in auditing from the University of Pretoria, and he's involved with the Institute of Internal Auditors. He's acting head of the technical department, and he's an experienced internal audit, governance, and risk management professional with more than 15 years of experience in providing internal audit, risk management, and governance services to clients. Well, before I take up all the time, it's my privilege to hand over to Prof. Cesar. Thank you, Cesar. We're looking forward to learning more from you and your team today.
Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Thank you, Lindy. And while I am listening to you, at the same time, I'm watching the new, messages coming through all over the world. And we
absolutely
welcome. And everybody, more than 100 participants now. So we are ready to share our all experiences with you.
Wonderful, thank you.
So as you mentioned, we have very distinguished guest speakers. And we will be discussing about the impact of new IIA global standards on good governance. So when we think about the new working environment, and we call it as auditors the audit universe and the risk universe. In order to adapt to new conditions, there are many changes around us, the business environment, and this brings the necessity to adopt IIA standards. Structural and fundamental changes will be coming, and if we compare, there is the old and the new version of the auditing, the fieldwork, the methodology, the governance, management, and performance metrics. All and everything will be changing with the new vision of internal auditors in the new era. Here, I would like to say that we usually focus on our work too much. Previously I used to attend many field works. That's why I'm telling this. But it's time to change our vision so that to show our value-added activities to our all stakeholders. That's why this time the definition of internal auditing is simplified to make it elevator pitch, to make it easy to remember, to understand, and short, so that everybody can understand what is the value behind internal auditing actually. That's why we have this internal auditing enhances the organization's success by providing the board and the management with objective assurance and advice. Here, the change coming from the, rather than saying consultancy, we have the advice and advisory role to adapt to the new, everything is changing so fast, and auditors' role as the trusted advisors within their organization should have this vision to lead the change and contribute to their organization and giving assurance and advice. Here we have 5 domains, 15 principles, and 53 standards coming so, soon, let's say. You see the dates. There may be some amendments, but at the end of the day, the regulations will be operative very soon. So as our colleagues, you need to get ready for these new things, and you need to learn and technical stuff and the standards so that you can add more value to your organization. Top changes to the standards coming from simplifying to make it basic, simple, understandable, so that you focus on your work and show your work to specifically, within the governance structure, management, audit committee, and chief audit executive's role should be clarified to be more competitive. Here, for this reason, they consolidate 6 elements within the standards. And also, we have the new purpose of internal auditing within the new standards. There is a focus on ethical issues because it's all related to technology. If we are doing digital audit based on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other audit analytics techniques, this means we need more ethical perspectives to show our work, quality of work to the stakeholders. In addition to that, we see that public sector specifically is important, and it's not only public sector, also small audit functions and advisory services are in focus to make it more value-added approach. Governance structure, Dirk will be giving us all the details. So everything is new. based on either if you are individual or a huge internal audit department, doesn't matter. You will find many things in new global standards to show your direction, to add more value to your organization, which is quite connected to conformance and performance metrics. This is the methodology. We have the purpose, ethics, professionalism. Within that structure, we have the governance, management, and performing internal audit services, how to do it, but in the basic and simple way to have good communication with our stakeholders. If we look through these domains, you will see that everything is in order and in connection to the big picture. So I have the link. Please feel free to visit to see the videos and all other materials, because in such a short time, we will show you the major issues, but if you need any assistance, feel free to reach us, or the IA as a platform, always ready to support us. Being a member there, I know that they are quite hard work as well. And governing internal audit and showing the internal audit mandate. This is quite important and new to the global standards. In addition to that, the quality and board interaction issues are coming to scale. And when we talk about an internal audit mandate, it should be related to the authority, roles, and responsibilities. If you define everything in detail and clear, make the roles and responsibilities and their authority known by the organization, top level, so that you have the policies, procedures, and if any need, you need to organize some trainings to make this awareness all the time available for everybody, to see the conditions, the fieldwork criteria, the effects around us, because it's all related to risk and effect issues and findings. And there is a new approach from internal auditing perspective to tell all the findings within the engagement conclusion. And Dirk will be giving more details about the meaning of this, because it's a communication style is changing to making us more sit at the table to show our power and knowledge as trusted advisors of the organization. And I put a star there because when you manage the internal audit function and have the services, you need to have all the technical resources. It's not only enough to have the financial resources or human resources, but you need to use the technology as well. And here, as GGA, Good Governance Academy, we have a platform, and supporting the CAPIA project is related to continuous auditing tools and techniques based on artificial intelligence to support all our colleagues globally. And you are always welcome to join our sessions and activities as well. For the performing, I would like to mention again the importance of public sector, because sometimes it's quite difficult to differentiate their role within the regulatory authorities and, continental conditions, regional sometimes conditions affect their position. So in that respect, public sector in 14.4 and 14.6 and specifically 15.2 depends on the conditions to clarify public sector colleagues' position, support and assist their value-added activities. Please keep in mind that When you read the new global standards, there are some, nuance within the verse. If in a sentence you see that starting with the must means unconditional requirements are there, so you need to be careful about your executions, your recommendations and everything. If it's a should or if it's a may, means optional or can be a requirement, so that your interpretation and your behavior and your policy and supporting all documents, working papers and everything must be in line with these approaches as well. So after this, showing you the big picture, I would like to thank you on behalf of Good Governance Academy Research Platform. You are always welcome. And I would like to now give the floor to our distinguished guests. Let me check who is ready. Letiwe, would you like to start? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, colleagues. Please confirm if you can see my slides.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all guests that we have from different countries. So all over the world, I see we have a lot of guests available today, over 130 colleagues who are available online. As I've been introduced earlier, my name is Nzama-Sithole, and I'm a colleague from University of Johannesburg, where I teach auditing to second-year diploma in accountancy students. So in my presentation, I will cover the following. I'm just gonna cover four important questions on why the change, what has changed, although Prof says I have covered what has changed, but I'll just touch on a few things. And also we'll be talking on the practical implications of this new global auditing standards and the benefits that might come from applying this introduced global auditing standards. But before I get into these four questions that I have, the four big questions that I have, I would like all colleagues, you can use the chat box to reflect on the big question that is often asked when there are scandals, when there's fraud that has occurred in organization. The big question can be, or it's often, where were internal auditors or where were auditors, right? Is that not a question that is being asked? And that big question directs our discussion today of us indicating the impact of auditing standards and good governance, because there's a relationship. My colleague is here, very funny enough, Dirk is here. In 2019, during the Institute of Internal Auditors presentation, he posed a question as well, where we had scandals in South Africa, where there was nearly a collapse of African Bank, Steinhoff issue, Tongaat, Hulat also had an incident, VPS Bank. We also had a case of Gupta Linkway, and Dirk asked a question, in all these 5 organizations, did they not have internal auditors? And if they did, what role did they play to ensure there's proper governance to avoid such incidents? Then I don't see any action on the chat, but while I present, just ask yourself and also reflect on the role of auditors and the governance, and now why the change of good governance. During my curious sitting while preparing for the presentation, I asked the question again, and I went through Scopus, and I had 2 keywords that to search in the Scopus engine, where I have all index papers on Scopus index. I asked 2 questions, auditing and good governance. In my search, I found 163 articles which focus on these 2 keywords, auditing and good governance. And in the finding, I found 163 words. And from the 163, I've managed to get this picture that I'm displaying to you. And this picture displays the relationship of auditing and governance. And out of the 163 articles that I found, which majority of them were from the journal articles, they indicate the relationship of corporate governance, that for corporate governance, when you zoom on corporate governance, how did I get this picture? I used the Voice Viewer, which does the literature review and gives a picture of what literature has. So from the 163 articles that I found, I went through Voice Viewer and downloaded it and through pictures of what literature says about the relationship between auditing and corporate governance. And as you can see here on the gray with corporate governance, it has a strong relationship with auditing. So if there is proper governance in place, it cannot occur if there's no auditing in an organization, if there's no, and when you say auditing, it's not only external auditing, but both auditing, external and internal auditing, then there will be good governance. And it also involves management of the organization. It also involves accountability, because when this is in place, there's proper control in the business. As you see, there's proper financial reporting and there's accounting in place. Then when I zoom to another picture that I drew, when I'm focusing on auditing itself, no longer focusing on corporate governance, but on auditing, it also displays that when there's proper functioning audits in the business, there will be transparency, there will be accountability, corruption will be reduced. Remember, I asked a question earlier on when there are scandals, what's the big question that is asked? The big question is, where are the internal auditors, or where are the auditors? Where were they? What did they do to prevent or detect any issues that might prevent the operation of the business? Then here you see that when the auditing is functioning properly, there's risk management that can be done. There's proper records keeping in the organization. There's transparency, there's accountability that can be put in place in the business. And when I zoom further, because remember the first picture was corporate governance. Now, when I zoom to governance itself, governance also displays that there will be quality in place. The audit work will be of quality. If within the audit function there's proper governance, then there will be performance that will be in place. How auditors relate to the board, how they relate to the audit committee will also be in place. If governance is in place, as I've mentioned earlier, there will be proper record keeping. And when you zoom to audit committee themselves who represent the board, they will not be able to function on their own without relying their work from auditors, ensuring that there's good relationship. Then if there's a good relationship between the auditors, audit committee and the external auditors, the audit fees can be managed and corporate governance will be in place as well. So that answers the question, why the change, why the governance, why the new global auditing standards have been introduced. This is to ensure that as the country is evolving, as the world is evolving, there are new changes. The pandemic showed us that we need to evolve. We have 4IR that's also indicating that we need to revolve as an organization. So this auditing standards come at a good time for one to come up and be up to date and evolve to ensure that they better serve the community. Prof. Cesar have covered on what has changed, where she mentioned that there are 5 domains that have been put in place. There are 15 principles and 53 standards that have been put in place. So I'm just going to, I was supposed to actually quiz you to see if you were listening attentively to what you were saying, but I'll just highlight what she indicated, that there's a new name, the new global auditing standard, there's a new structure, there are new sections in each standard, there's a new purpose of internal auditing, there are new ethics and professional domains and standards, there's a new governance domain, which my colleague Derek will cover in detail, reflecting on what needs to be done in an audit function for governance to be in place and how it affects the organizations. And quality assurance as well, it has been put in place. There's a public sector focus, which Prof. Cesar have covered on, that it plays an important role, because remember that the mandate of the public sector is to serve the communities. So if they miss the mandate, they will not be able to serve the organizations, the communities. But if there's proper auditing and proper governance within the public sector, then the mandate of the public sector will be in place. And there are also new terms that have been introduced by the new global auditing standards. So as a colleague from the university that gives access to the students, the university that is student focused, we focused and we said, okay, with this proposed global auditing standards, there are different road shows which are being conducted where colleagues in the auditing profession are reflecting on what has been proposed as the new standards. They're given a voice. However, when I was sitting, I saw there's a gap. These standards need to be adopted and applied by students. And currently the curriculum is still focusing on the current global standards. What about the new ones? Students need to be brought in for them to share their perspective. And that was when in 2023, we said, okay, with the colleagues from the Institute of Internal Auditors, Johannesburg region, we partnered and said, let us come together and serve the students. Let us invite all auditing students, can be undergrad, postgrad students, for them to reflect on these global auditing standards, on what they think. Is it applicable? Does it make sense? Is it relevant? Does it cover everything? Especially now with the 4IR and SDGs, the core focus of the university on all other organizations. The seminar that we had for students was not limited to University of Johannesburg students, but it was open to all university students in South Africa, which can be from TVET colleges and also from the higher education of learning. Then in the presentation, what we did with the students, sorry, my alarm is off. I'm not sure, can I continue as a distracted? It's fine. My alarm is off. Can I be excused to switch off? Sorry. Apologies for that, my alarm was just off. Okay, so during the student perceptions, we had given students to focus on the glossary. The first thing was for them to focus on the glossary and give a view of this proposed global standard, are they in place or not? And the very concerning issue that students raised was the definition of internal auditor. The students were like, okay, the new global auditing standard does not cover the definition of internal auditor in detail, so there's no clarity on that. The definition of what is meant by accountability is also a concern for the students, that this new global auditing standard does not cover that in detail. As a student, I would not know what do I need to do to ensure that I'm accountable. And as an internal auditor, what does the standard requires of me to carry myself as an internal auditor? Then there was an issue of materiality where students were like, what does it mean, for one, if they're conducting an audit, when they say the issue is material, and how does it measure materiality? How do you quantify that, as the new proposed auditing standards was not clear on that? And Prof has covered the SDGs and artificial intelligence tools and indicated that we are evolving. However, the auditing standards, the global ones, the one that are proposed, does not cover that in detail, and that's of a concern, because we need to move with times, and we need to ensure that there's clarity on what needs to be done by auditors to assist organizations to comply with the SDGs. And also, when organizations are taking opportunities of these disruptive technologies where there might be issues of ethics, what role can be played by internal auditors to ensure that organizations do not buy in on the biases that are come with these technologies, because the technologies, when they are used, sometimes they have this, like with algorithmic issues, they come up with this, the biasness. Then with the internal auditing function, they will be able to assist organizations that when they adopt these different tools of artificial intelligence, there's proper governance in place. And now we just want to propose back to the auditing colleagues and the glossary that they need to maybe update that. Then the new global standard as well, they are calling for courage from the auditors. However, the safeguards of now, when the auditors are being courageous, what safeguards are there? What safeguards are available for them by the standards, saying if one pick up a red flag of an issue, how will they be protected? As we've seen lately with issues where whistleblowers get victimized. So we would want to propose the global standards to indicate to the organizations what needs to be in place for victims to be protected. And also when it comes to the chief audit executive, the standard just says the chief audit executive should have skills. What skills? And when you say experience, what level? How do you rate the levels? And when it comes to competency as well, there was an issue of experience that is not being emphasized. And students were like, if I'm aspiring to be a chief audit executive one day, how will I know I qualify? Because that's an issue, right? So the students are like, how will I know if I qualify? What years of experience do I need to have? The standard is not clear on that. So maybe the standard needs to be updated on that. Then the terms between observation and findings, students were like, there's no clarity on which one weighs better than the other, which one is important, which one needs to be acted upon, and the glossary needs to be updated on that. Then now when it comes to co-sourcing, the students indicated that co-sourcing, there's an issue for one, as a question that I've asked earlier in terms of where were internal auditors. If now an organization have indicated that there's a skill that they are short of, then they co-source that skill, then they become an issue where organization now faces the fraud. who will be held accountable. So the glossary, that the new global auditing standard does not indicate on who's responsible for what when it comes to the co-sourcing. So the glossary needs to be updated when it gives more information of who is responsible. If I'm an organization and I pick up that there's a limitation of resources and I get colleagues from maybe Deloitte or KPMG to come in, then in whatever that we are doing, if there are issues, who's going to be accountable? Then the global standard must maybe assist on that. And also, if you are going to rely on other people's work or co-sourcing, working papers also needs to be addressed, because the new global standards indicates that the working papers should be accessible to senior management when they require. And that poses a risk of intimidation, a risk of interference, the risk of independence as well, because if working papers can be given to any party that requires them, then that's really a concern. So maybe the global auditing standard needs to be more clearer on who can get access to the working papers and to what extent they can get access to the working papers. And these colleagues were views shared by students on the glossary. And now moving to, okay. Then when now in the 5 domains that Prof says I have indicated, the students only reflected on domain 1 and 2 because they are not yet have work experience. They could not really reflect on the performance of the audit function, on the governance of the audit function. The students were concerned with the value creation that, okay, now the global auditing standards requires us to have this value creation. How do you quantify that I'm creating a value as an auditor in an organization? The global auditing standard is not clear on that. The sustainability issue that needs to be in place, that needs to be put in place and done by audit function. But now the glossary does not guide, or not the glossary, but the global auditing standard does not guide on if you're doing a sustainable audit, what do you need to do? So that is not really clear. It's just a word that has been put in the global auditing standards, but is not clearly explained, especially for the students, for them to understand and follow. Then when we move to domain 2, where now in previous standards, professional skepticism was there, but it was combined with other words, but now it's a standalone. And now it's required for auditors to be skeptical. Then the students are asking themselves, if now I'm being skeptical, how are you, a third party, going to assess my skepticism if I'm skeptical? How are you going to quantify if you're doing performance review and there's a requirement on the performance that I have to be skeptical? How are you as a line manager going to verify and quantify that I'm meeting 5 points on this because I'm being skeptical? So the standard needs to give more details of if it requires for auditors to be skeptical, how do management or even themselves as auditors, if they have to do reflection on their performance, how will they measure the skepticism, right? Then when it comes to CPD, there's a confusion on the current global auditing standard that have been proposed, where CPDs are required, but it's an umbrella. There's no clarity on, okay, CPDs are only applicable to the certified internal auditors, or is it applicable to all practicing or non-practicing auditors? Clarity needs to be given on that, because currently, as myself, I'm a certified internal auditor, I'm not practicing. In my reporting for CPD, I'm just required for 10 hours of my CPD in a year. But now with the new global auditing standards, it says 20 hours per year, but it does not specify whether is it for practicing, non-practicing, or certified internal auditors. Then the issue of advisory and assurance service roles, there's clarity that is needed from the students on what it means in if you're an advisory, as Prof has mentioned that earlier, that the consulting, there was consulting, now it has changed. How is that change going to be implemented, and how is it measured? And also, what impact will the auditors have in these different roles, which is not really clear for the upcoming students or upcoming internal auditors who are still students in the business. Then with the last 2 points, as you know, with the pandemic, it has allowed us to work from home. As I'm currently presenting at home, I'm using a work laptop. So the issue is, if now I'm an auditor, I'm required to do this audit at home. And if I do the audit at maybe in the restaurant, and I get to speak to the client over the phone on Teams, someone can overhear our discussion, and if the sensitive information is being disclosed, what are the safeguards which will be put in place because now the global auditing standard is very silent on that there might be issues where the laptops which are meant to be used for working papers can be used for maybe watching Netflix. So the safeguards are not there on what businesses are they saying, because we're working in different environment. I can be in a meeting where my husband is listening to my conversation and I'm talking about a sensitive issue of a client that needs to be addressed by the auditing global standard, because it's very not clear and it poses a huge risk for the organization, its reputation, and the governance of the organization. Okay, those were the views shared by the student. Then the second seminar that I've attended also in May while we were doing this discussion and reflecting on the global standard was with the colleagues in the banking sector and financial services, where we reflected on the glossary that has been proposed. And we, during the discussions, even with the students that I've just mentioned earlier, we had a presentation, the report was written and submitted to the global standard so that we can participate and have an input of what has been proposed to us as internal auditors and to ensure that governance is in place. Then with the internal auditors that we met in May, we also had an issue which is similar to what that was shared by students, where they say the definition of internal auditors is not clear, accountability is not clear. Then the finding, the word finding, what does it mean if it's a finding and a follow-up? That needs to be clarified because it's not important, it's not really covered in the global auditing standards. Then what was mostly of a concern for us as a working class, as internal auditors, was, as we've mentioned, with artificial intelligence tools, which is in place, methodology of how to conduct an audit has changed. However, of concern, if one did not a Google search, but a search on the standards which have been proposed, Agile only was picked up once. And that is a concern. If now we are using technology and that methodologies which are applied by auditors is very diverse, we're doing continuous auditing, with real-time audits, why is it not covered by the proposed global auditing standards? That is a concern. So with the glossary, we're saying the Institute of Internal Auditors should maybe, when reflecting on this proposed global audit standard, they should touch on what it means by continuous auditing, what it means by agile auditing, what it means by real-time audit, and what are the roles of internal auditors in these areas to ensure that they still add value to the organizations, to ensure there's good governance as well and performance in organization. Clarity also was required, same with the students, with the role of a chief audit executive on the skills and experience, because that was not covered in the glossary and needs to be covered. And there were issues as well in terms of the ranking of the chief audit executive, because in some organization, you will, especially in the public sector, because we had a colleague of ours who was from the public sector, who mentioned that in some institutions in the public sector, you'd find a chief audit executive reporting to the CEO. And that is a concern, because now the independence of the auditor gets compromised. Then also the authority that the chief audit executive needs to have gets compromised as well. Because if I'm a chief audit executive and I go to the CEO and I tell them of the findings that I found, will they act on them? Will they take them serious, or will they dismiss them before they even get to the board? That's really a concern. And we suggested that maybe the proposed global auditing standards needs to cover that as well, and ensure that the ranking of the chief audit executive is aligned with the CEO, and then they all report to the board, not the other way around, because that causes a lot of confusion and also negatively affects the role of the internal auditors, and which later affects the governance. Then the combined assurance, they also need clarity on what is the role of internal auditors when it comes to combined assurance, as the global auditing standard does not cover that as well in advance or in detail. That needs to be covered and addressed. Co-sourcing, as I've mentioned earlier, students also had an issue with co-sourcing, and the auditors as well had an issue with co-sourcing. If now we have different people that are coming together to provide the services, who is responsible? The global auditing standard does not cover that and becomes a concern. Working papers as well were concerned, as it was covered by the students, so they had similar concerns and internal auditors' perceptions on governance. Also here, there's a problem that has been picked up by the internal auditors, and then say the glossary needs to be updated to ensure there's clarity on what needs to be covered by internal auditors in these instances. Then when we went into the different domains, the internal auditors had the following issues. The internal auditors mandate where the issue of senior management approval. Then global auditing standard says the approval needs to be done by management. And it's very silent on to what extent can they approve. If they have to sign, what is the impact of the independence? Because if now the internal audit function has a mandate that they need to cover as per the CEO, as per the board, not the CEO, as per the board. However, if in the public sector, that charter needs to be approved by the CEO, it poses a risk of independence within an organization. And that was a concern for the internal auditors. And also when it comes to the board support, the board supporting the internal audit function, there's more guidance that is required on what is responsibility, what is the responsibility of the board in serving the internal audit function. That needs to be in place. As currently, it's just not clear in terms of the word the should and must that have been posed by Prof. Cesar, that when the standard has been written, it should be clear on what it means by should and must, because it's easy for people not to comply and say, no, the standard said must or should. It was not really specific. It's a requirement or it's a must, it's unconditional, because currently it says should, which someone can say it's a requirement, but I don't need to comply, I can give an excuse. So the auditors will say it no when it comes to board interaction, because if there's a good relationship between the auditing function and the board, it's easy for the mandate of the business or the performance of the business to be in place, as I displayed the pictures earlier, where I showed you that when there is proper governance, then there's proper auditing, then the performance in the business. But now with the global auditing standard, it's not really clear, because there's sometimes the internet use of should, use, must, which can be a confusion to those who need to comply with it. The positioning of independence is also an issue on safeguards of co-sourcing. I've already covered on that. These are the standards which the auditors were concerned about and highlighted. And then with standard 8, with the quality of the audit work that has been done by the auditors, there is clarity that is required in terms of who needs to do quality. Is it internal or external? Is it supposed to be every 5 years? And if it's insourced, when can you do an external sourcing of quality assurance? That is really not clear currently with the global auditing standard that has been proposed. So that needs to be updated and ensure that it's complying and it makes sense to those who need to comply with it. Then lastly, on the reflection of the internal auditors from the banking industry, finance industry, was the plan of the strategy, where it said the strategy needs to be approved or put in place by senior management. Then we ask ourselves, who comes with the audit strategy? Is it the chief audit executive, or does it come with the senior management? Sometimes in the public sector can be the CEO, which might mislead or misguide the audit function, saying, focus on this so that they can avoid scandals to be uncovered. That's really a concern. Now, the global auditing standard needs to be clearer on that. And the signing of the charter, I've already paused this. Another standard 9, it says the CEO must sign, and we ask why? Why must be a CEO? Why not the board or the chairman of the board? That's really a concern. Or maybe them reading the minutes and signing on the minutes saying, yes, we approve on this charter on the strategy by the IAF. But now if it's a CEO, what is the impact on the independence? That's a question that we pose as well.
This part is quite sensitive, and I believe Dirk will be telling us much more detailed stories about it. So yes, please, you come to the end, and we need to give floor to dear Dirk. Thank you.
Yes, I'll do that. Thank you so much. This is my last slide. Then board accountability plan should be put in place as well. And lastly, I've already covered coordination and reliance on who is responsible for the risk. Is it the internal audit function? Is it the chief risk officer? The auditing global standard is not clear on that, and that needs to be covered. So there's a lot that needs to be covered by the proposed global auditing standards, but overall, it is a good direction to the success, because if this global standard are being introduced and we giving our input to it, because it's not yet in place, then we ensure that we elevate the auditing profession, we remain relevant, we add value, and with the CAPIA projects that we have in the public sector, we'll ensure that we comply, whatever risks that we pick up or whatever gap that we pick up, we'll be able to address and ensure that we are more relevant, we're adding value, but even though there's more that needs to be done when it comes to SDGs and artificial intelligence tools. I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dirk.
Thank you. We are all waiting for our distinguished speaker, Dirk Strijdom. We are waiting for you.
Thank you very much,
Learn
Prof.
new things coming from all over the world. Thank you.
If you can end your slide, Letiwe, then I can share. There we go. Thank you very much for the introduction, Prof. Caesar, and thank you to everyone. I'm very excited today to be able to speak to you about the impact of what we now call, or what we're going to call, the Global Internal Audit Standards. So I think it really lies in the name already. The previous standards used to be called the International Standards for Professional Practice of Internal Auditing, quite a mouthful, and you tie it at the end of that sentence. The new wording, Global Internal Audit Standards, is a lot more succinct and to the point. I just want to switch my screen on so that we can get into my presentation. Okay. And I'll take it that everyone can see my slideshow. I assume so. I see thumbs up. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
100%. So the impact of global internal audit standards on good governance. What do we mean with good governance? I think as an introductory point of view, and why the need, and I think Prof. Caesar and Letiwe already touched on the need for good governance and the impact of the standards. But really, I think if we look at the world, internal audit is a profession that certainly, and listen to the word that I'm using, a profession that's got a lot to offer. But I'm going to ask some critical questions during my presentation today, and I really want you to start to think about some of these concepts. So I'm going to be a little bit controversial by design, and I want you to do a little bit of introspection today while you're listening to me. I mean, you need to think about the potential impact that these global internal audit standards can have, because the IIA Global, the Institute of Internal Auditors, are really trying, and this is a very big effort to set the direction, or set the direction for the profession and going into the future to make certain that we can add the value that a good internal auditor should. Okay, so maybe just setting the context. Uncertainty ahead, as if we haven't had enough uncertainty. I think uncertainty is the only standard in the world currently. But what we expect is uncertainty, doesn't matter where we go. I mean, with all of this uncertainty and the context of uncertainty that we need to consider, where do we stand as internal audit professionals, and more so, where do those charged with governance oversight, where do they stand? Because we tend to think of things from our own perspective. If I'm an internal auditor, I think of the world and my current context from the perspective of an internal auditor. If you're a board member, you need to think about the current context and within which the organization finds itself from a perspective of a board member. But today I really want us just to step out and see the big picture a little bit. Because if we talk about the impact of a new global internal audit standards on good governance, we need to understand the context, what's happened in the world. We're living in a world where diversity of culture is critical. Artificial intelligence concepts, artificial intelligence, the impact of technology, what the pandemics and the risk of future pandemics, but the impact of COVID-19 on the world, cybersecurity, geopolitical risk, all of these elements weigh heavily on organizations, whether they're in the private sector or in the public sector. It doesn't really matter. And at the end of the day, as internal auditors, we serve these organizations. So our value proposition lies within that we are within these organizations. We are part of these organizations. Whether they're in the public sector or private sector, we are part of it. And we've got a unique value offering that we can bring to the table. However, there's something critical to consider when it comes to internal audit. And if you look at the current standards and the wording used in the current standards implied a lot of things. So in the wording of the current standards, the involvement of the board was implied. But really, if you look at those words on the screen, the corruption, and I've seen some of the questions coming through, like, how's these standards going to impact, positively in terms of good governance, etc. Artificial intelligence, Web 3.0, we know about programming bias. When you speak about, it's actually a new concept in terms of governance that you need to think. Your organization that you are an internal auditor within, where you work as an internal auditor, they might be utilizing artificial intelligence, and they most likely are. But what is the risk of bias that's being introduced into the organization? And are you ready as an internal auditor to engage at this level? And this is why we needed to update the standards. This is why we needed new standards. To some extent, not brand new, some of the old concepts that carry through, but we needed to revisit the standards. So it was very critical for this project to be undertaken by the IIA. And then, obviously, if you look at corporate failures, there's always this risk on the next slide. And it's really a corporate governance consideration. And my question is, and I said I'm going to ask some tough questions. My question today is, how many of us actually sit and think about this, especially institutional investors and those looking from the outside into the companies? How many consider the importance of having a well-functioning internal audit function for which the board, not the CAE, listen to my word, for which the board is held accountable? An internal audit function where you can hold the board accountable. Or does that organization, or do the organizations that you're looking at, do they only have an internal audit function to window dress? What do I mean by that? Your listing requirements, your stock exchange listing requirements might require for an organization listed on the exchange to have an internal audit function. If it's a public sector entity, it might be required by law that they must have an internal audit function. But if I actually go and I look at the substance, what makes up that internal audit function, you might realize that there's a mandate, but the ability of that internal audit function to deliver on the mandate. And I saw on Prof. Cesar's presentation that star next to the technological resources. If you look at the mandate that was set for that internal audit function, and I look at that internal audit function, and I look at the qualifications of the individuals within that function. I look at the resources that they have to deliver on that mandate. I analyze the internal audit plan. I quickly realize that maybe I'm not looking at the real internal audit function. Maybe I'm just looking at someone ticking the box to say, I do have an internal audit function. So I think when we talk about good governance, one of the aspects of good governance is having a well-functioning, effective and efficient internal audit department within an organization. So, or are the internal auditors only mannequins in the shop window? And we really need to start considering these things, and we need to create awareness. And I think the new global internal audit standards, where we are now, this is a fantastic opportunity to create awareness in the world that we need to consider investors, institutional investors, and stakeholders at AGMs, those holding the organizations accountable for their actions, need to ask the questions in terms of internal auditors. I mean, we know at the AGM, the external auditors are there, the CFOs there, the CEOs there, and they need to answer these questions by shareholders and other stakeholders in terms of their financial performance. But what are we asking of internal auditors when it comes to the typical governance, risk and control issues, when it comes to reputational issues, when it comes to sustainability matters? Because those assurance providers are there within the organization. And I wouldn't feel comfortable if the organization that I'm investing in or that I'm looking at, you know, if I don't have a capacitated internal audit function to deliver on that. So I would consider this as a metric of good governance. And ironic, because we sometimes think that when we talk about good governance, what are the role of internal auditors when it comes to good governance? But having an efficient and effective internal audit function itself is a metric of good governance, which is quite an interesting thought. Okay, so some of the questions now that I want to touch on.
Hi, Dirk-Linie, 5 minutes, thanks.
Yeah, so some of the important questions that I did want to touch on is the fact that is internal audit actually professional? And what do you need to consider? Why are the standards so important? So on that specific question, I mean, when you go to a doctor, when you fly a plane, especially when you need an operation, you always make certain that the people that are delivering these services, they are qualified specialists. They have up-to-date CPD. They get continuous training. But at the same time, we have internal auditors within organizations, and are they really professionals? Do they maintain their CPD? Are they up to date? Do they have standards that they can be held accountable against? And ladies and gentlemen, that actually answers the question about the importance of standards and why these new global internal audit standards are so important from a governance point of view. It ensures accountability. Internal auditors must be members of the professional body, and the new standards explicitly state the requirements, especially from a board perspective, but also from the individual internal audit perspective and the department perspective. So very important, the need for these global internal audit standards. The value proposition, ironically, lies within the purpose statement as it stands. Internal auditors enhances the organization's success by providing the board and management with objective assurance and advice. I think we all know that. I really want to get to the end because we are a little bit out of time, and I want to get to the important slides. Prof. Caesar already touched on this slide, so I'm not going to repeat that. I want to speak to you about the ability of internal auditors to actually use this time that we have to create awareness on the important role that they have to play within private and public sector when it comes to good governance. Because you've got domain 3 in the new global internal audit standards. And domain 3 now explicitly states what the board's role or roles are in relation to internal audit. It clearly states what board members should be doing, obviously through oversight committees from a practical point of view, such as the audit committee. So it's very important that we use this to create awareness about the importance of internal audit in relation to good governance. It's a catalyst to create and invigorate conversations around the important role that boards and accounting offices in public sector have to support effective internal audit functions. I wouldn't invest in a company where you don't have a board that approved the mandate and capacitated the internal auditors. You need the support of executive management. And ladies and gentlemen, lastly, I want to leave you with this thought. It's our call to action. There's this excellent paper that's produced by Rainer Lenz and Kim Jefferson. It's called The Future of Internal Auditing, the Gardener of Governance. And in that paper, they actually describe the governance space as the heartland of internal audit. Because there's a mutualistic relationship between the value that internal auditors bring to an organization and good governance. You cannot have good governance without having a well-functioning internal audit function. But at the same time, internal auditors are but one element of that big puzzle of good governance, as you would have seen in my opening slide. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today. And I'm certain we can have a very long conversation on this specific point. Yes, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Sorry, thank you very much for your valuable presentation. And also, thank you for sharing this, recent article. As you may follow from the social media, almost 20 different languages translated and we have the opportunity to read in different, countries' languages. And as contribution to our profession, I invited my students to translate Kyrgyz, Uzbek, Kazakh, and Russian to contribute Dr. Len's initiative. And once again, I would like to thank you, and we need to be aware of the importance of our profession, and we do many things to make it more and more valuable. And this activity is also part of making this seen by specifically board members, audit committee members, means all stakeholders, so that they understand the inner value as trusted advisors of their organization. Real trusted advisors are the internal auditors. So thank you very much, and I would like to give the floor to Lindy. Dr. Lindy, please. You can make the closing speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Cesar. Indeed, as the world changes, so do the professions, and the practitioners need to keep up. So thank you so much to our presenters for such an insightful and interesting and valuable presentation by each of you and from each of you. Indeed, there's so much more to discuss. You will note questions and comments in the Q&A and in our discussion forum, and I'm sure our presenters will follow up on those and stay in contact with our attendees who ask their questions. I want to also remind everyone that this presentation will be posted online on our website, so please revisit it. I think there's so much, it's so rich, so much information that it's worth a revisit, and feel free to connect with our presenters via the website or LinkedIn or their organizations. So that's a final thank you from me to you. And then most of all, thank you to Caroline Chalmers, as well as the GGA, for hosting this valuable webinar. We certainly had a broad audience, and we appreciate the platform and your attendance. Until next time, thank you everyone, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.